When my father threw my duffel bag onto the porch and said, "You're 18 now, figure it out yourself," I thought my life was over. 15 years later, when he called begging for a loan to save his crumbling business, I let him talk for exactly 3 minutes before I told him the truth. I didn't just have the money to help him, I owned the company that was about to buy him out. The morning I turned 18, I woke up to the smell of burnt toast and my father's voice cutting through the kitchen like a serrated blade. He wasn't yelling yet, but I could hear that particular pitch, sharp, impatient, loaded with disappointment. I lay in bed for a moment, staring at the water stain on my ceiling that looked like a map of nowhere, and I knew something was coming. I'd spent my entire childhood trying to be what he wanted. Good grades, varsity soccer, a plan for business school. But my father, Richard Calloway, didn't measure success by effort. He measured it by results, and in his eyes, I'd never delivered anything worth his time. He owned Calloway Manufacturing, a mid-sized industrial parts supplier that had been in the family for 2 generations. He wanted me to take over someday, but only if I proved I was worthy. That word, worthy, hung over every dinner, every report card, every conversation. When I came downstairs that morning, he was sitting at the head of the table with his coffee and the newspaper, same as every day. My mother wasn't there. She'd stopped joining us for breakfast years ago, retreating into her garden and her silence. I poured myself a bowl of cereal and sat down, hoping he'd at least say happy birthday. Instead, he folded the newspaper and looked at me with those cold, evaluating eyes. "You didn't get the scholarship," he said. It wasn't a question, I nodded. I'd applied to 3 schools, hoping for financial aid, but I hadn't gotten the full ride I needed. My backup plan was community college and working part-time, maybe transferring later. I'd been about to tell him that, but he didn't wait. "Then you're done here," he said. "You're 18 now. You want to waste your life working dead-end jobs, that's your choice, but you're not doing it under my roof." I stared at him, my spoon frozen halfway to my mouth. "Dad, I can still go to school. I just need a year to save up." "You need to grow up," he interrupted. "You've had every advantage and you've squandered it. You're soft, you're entitled, and I'm not going to enable that anymore." He stood, straightening his tie. "Pack your things, you have until tonight." I looked toward the hallway, hoping my mother would appear, but the house stayed silent. My father walked out without another word, and I sat there alone, my cereal turning to mush in the bowl. By evening, I'd stuffed everything I owned into 2 duffel bags. Clothes, a few books, my laptop, some photos. My mother came to my room once, her hands shaking as she pressed $200 into my palm. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I tried to talk to him. Her eyes were red, but she didn't fight for me. She never did. When my father came home, he didn't even come upstairs. He just shouted from the foyer, "Time's up, Ethan." I carried my bags down and he opened the front door like he was holding it for a stranger. I stopped on the porch, turned back, and tried one last time. "I can do better, just give me a chance." He shook his head. "You've had 18 years of chances. Don't come back until you've made something of yourself." Then he closed the door and I heard the lock click. I stood there for a long time, staring at that door, feeling the weight of everything I'd lost. Then I picked up my bags and walked down the driveway into the dark with no plan and nowhere to go. I spent the first 3 nights in my car, a beat-up Honda Civic I'd bought with summer job money. I parked in a grocery store lot and tried to figure out what came next. I had my mother's $200, a tank of gas, and a high school diploma. No family, no safety net. Just anger and a cold, clarifying thought that kept circling back. I'll prove him wrong. On the 4th day, I drove to the nearest city, a place called Millridge about 40 miles away, and I started looking for work. I applied everywhere: fast food, retail, warehouses. I finally got a job stocking shelves at a hardware store, 3rd shift, minimum wage. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I rented a room in a boarding house that smelled like mildew and old carpet, and I built a routine. Work at night, sleep in the mornings, spend afternoons at the public library learning everything I could about business, finance, and manufacturing. I didn't have tuition money, but I had time and rage, and I poured both into studying. At night, after my shift, I'd sit in my car and look at the spreadsheets I'd started building, maps of supply chains, cost analyses, industry trends. I didn't know what I was building toward yet, but I knew I needed to understand the world my father lived in. If I was going to beat him, I had to play his game better than he ever had. It took me 2 years of that grinding routine before I had enough saved to take a real risk. The risk came in the form of a man named Lou Brennan. Lou was a regular at the hardware store, a wiry guy in his 60s who ran a small machine shop on the edge of town. He'd come in twice a week for bolts, cutting tools, and industrial supplies, and we'd gotten into the habit of talking. He liked that I asked questions, real questions, about tolerances and materials and production costs. One night, after I'd helped him load a pallet of steel rods into his truck, he looked at me and said, "You're too smart to be stocking shelves, kid. You got plans?" I told him the truth. I wanted to start my own business, something in manufacturing or distribution, but I didn't have capital. Lou nodded slowly, like he was sizing me up, and then he made me an offer. "I need help. My shop's falling behind on orders and I can't keep up anymore. You work for me part-time, learn the ropes, and I'll pay you double what you're making here. If you're as sharp as you seem, maybe we partner on something down the line." I quit the hardware store that night. Working for Lou was like getting a master's degree in how things actually got made. He taught me how to read blueprints, how to negotiate with suppliers, how to manage a floor crew, and most importantly, how to spot inefficiencies. His shop was small, but it was nimble, and I started seeing opportunities everywhere, ways to cut costs, streamline workflows, and take on clients the big manufacturers ignored. After a year, I pitched Lou an idea. We could start a side business sourcing and distributing specialty parts for small manufacturers who couldn't afford to order in bulk from the major suppliers. We'd buy surplus inventory at a discount, repackage it, and sell it at a markup. Low overhead, high margins, and a service nobody else was offering in the region. Lou scratched his chin, grinned, and said, "Let's try it." We called it Apex Distribution. I ran it out of a rented storage unit, working 18-hour days, cold calling potential clients, building a website, managing inventory on spreadsheets that I updated at 2 in the morning. Lou handled the shop and I handled everything else. Within 6 months, we had 20 clients. Within a year, we had 50. I was 23 years old and I'd found my edge. The next few years blurred together in a haze of growth. We expanded into logistics, offering just-in-time delivery for clients who needed parts fast. We hired a small team, leased a warehouse, and started taking bigger risks. I reinvested every dollar we made, and Lou trusted me to lead. He became the father figure I'd never had, encouraging, steady, never asking me to prove I was worthy. When I was 26, Lou sat me down and said he was ready to retire. "This thing we built, it's yours now, Ethan. I'm keeping a small stake, but you've earned this." He slid the paperwork across the table and I signed it with hands that didn't shake. Apex Distribution became Apex Solutions, and I pivoted hard into a new model, buying struggling manufacturing operations, restructuring them, and turning them into profitable subsidiaries. It was a brutal, high-stakes game, but I was good at it. I'd learned how to read balance sheets, how to cut dead weight, and how to see potential where others saw failure. By the time I was 30, I owned 6 companies. By 32, I had 12. I kept my profile low, operating through holding companies and LLC structures, staying out of the press. I didn't want attention. I wanted control. And then one morning, my acquisitions team brought me a file on a company that was drowning in debt, losing clients, and teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. The name on the folder was Callaway Manufacturing. I sat in my office staring at that folder for a long time, and then I opened it. The numbers were worse than I'd imagined. My father had made a series of terrible decisions over the past decade, overextending on credit, ignoring industry shifts, alienating key clients. He was hemorrhaging money, and the only thing keeping him afloat was a line of credit that was about to be called in. Within 6 months, he'd be forced to sell or shut down. My acquisitions lead, a sharp woman named Diane, looked at me expectantly. "Do we make an offer?" I leaned back in my chair, feeling a strange, cold satisfaction settle in my chest. "Not yet," I said. "Let's wait. I want to see how desperate he gets." 3 months later, my phone rang. The caller ID said Richard Callaway. I let it ring 4 times before I answered. "Ethan?" My father's voice was hoarse, unfamiliar in its uncertainty. I hadn't heard it in 15 years, and the sound of it scraped against something raw inside me. "This is Ethan," I said, keeping my tone neutral. I was sitting in my corner office 40 floors above the city, looking out at a skyline I'd earned. My assistant had flagged the call as unusual, but I'd told her to put it through. I'd known this moment would come eventually. "It's your father." He cleared his throat. I'm calling because I need to talk to you. It's important." I didn't fill the silence. I let it stretch until it became uncomfortable, until I could almost hear him sweating on the other end. "I know it's been a long time," he continued, his voice tighter now. "And I know we didn't part on good terms, but I'm in a difficult position and I thought you might be willing to help." "Help with what?" I asked. "The business, Callaway Manufacturing. We're going through a rough patch and I'm exploring options to keep things afloat." "I heard," he paused, and I could hear the discomfort in the pause. "I heard you've done well for yourself, that you're in business now. I thought maybe we could talk father to son." I almost laughed, father to son, as if that phrase had ever meant anything between us. "What kind of help are you looking for?" I asked. "A loan," he said quickly, "or maybe an investment. I just need to get through the next 6 months and then we'll be back on track." His voice caught, and for the first time I heard something that might have been shame. "I know I wasn't fair to you. The way I handled things when you left, I've thought about that a lot, and I'm sorry. I'd like the chance to make it right." The apology felt thin, performative, like something he'd rehearsed, but even so, I felt a flicker of something, not forgiveness, but curiosity. I wanted to see how far he'd go. "How much do you need?" I asked. $2 million would stabilize us," he said. "I can offer you equity or we can structure it as a secured loan. Whatever works for you." $2 million, the amount was almost laughable. I spent more than that on a single acquisition, but I didn't tell him that. Instead, I said, "I'll need to see your financials, everything. Balance sheets, client contracts, outstanding debts. If I'm going to consider this, I need full transparency." "Of course," he said, relief flooding his voice. "I'll have my accountant send everything over." "Thank you, Ethan. I mean it. This means a lot." "I haven't agreed to anything yet," I said. "I'm just looking." "I understand, but thank you for even considering it. I'm proud of you, son." I should have said that a long time ago. The line went dead and I sat there staring at my phone, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and emptiness. He was proud of me now that he needed something. I called Diane into my office and told her to expedite the Callaway file. "I want a full forensic audit, every transaction, every asset, every liability. I want to know exactly how bad it is." She raised an eyebrow. "You're really going to help him?" "No," I said. "But I want him to think I am." Over the next 2 weeks, I reviewed every document my father's accountant sent over. The picture that emerged was even grimmer than I'd expected. Callaway Manufacturing was bleeding cash from a dozen wounds, obsolete equipment, bloated payroll, contracts with penalty clauses he couldn't afford to break. He'd been propping up the business with personal loans and credit lines, and he was months away from losing everything, including his house. I could have walked away. Let him crash and burn the way he'd let me fend for myself, but that felt too easy, too clean. I wanted him to see what I'd become. I wanted him to understand exactly what he'd thrown away. So I scheduled a meeting. We met at a coffee shop in his town, a place I'd never been to before. I arrived early, ordered a black coffee, and sat by the window watching the street. When my father walked in, I barely recognized him. He'd aged badly. His hair was thin and gray, his face lined and drawn. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. He spotted me, hesitated, and then walked over with a forced smile. "Ethan," he said, extending his hand, "you look good, successful." I shook his hand briefly and gestured for him to sit. He ordered a coffee, fumbling with his wallet, and I noticed his hands were shaking slightly. "Thank you for meeting me," he said once he'd sat down. "I wasn't sure you would." "I'm here to talk business," I said. "That's all." He nodded quickly. "Of course, did you get a chance to review the financials?" "I did," I said, "and I'll be honest with you, it's worse than you made it sound. You're not going through a rough patch. You're going under." His face tightened. "It's not that bad, I just need some breathing room." "You need a miracle," I said, "or a buyer." He looked at me sharply. "I'm not selling." "Then you're going to lose it," I said. "Within 6 months, your creditors are going to force a sale and you'll get pennies on the dollar if you're lucky." He stared into his coffee, his jaw working. "So what are you saying? You're not going to help?" "I didn't say that," I said. I leaned back, letting the moment stretch. "I'm saying a loan won't fix this, but I might be interested in an acquisition." His head snapped up. "You want to buy me out?" "I want to buy the company," I corrected. You can stay on as a consultant if you want, but I'd be in control. He shook his head slowly. That business has been in our family for 2 generations, and you're about to lose it, I said. This way, at least it survives. He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time, and I saw the realization dawning in his eyes, the understanding that I wasn't the failure he'd dismissed 15 years ago. How did you? He stopped, swallowed. What kind of business are you in, Ethan? I smiled, and it wasn't kind. The kind that buys companies like yours. What I didn't tell him yet was the truth I'd been holding close. I already owned the majority of his debt. My father stared at me across the table, his coffee untouched, his face pale. You're serious, he said. You want to take my company? I'm offering to save it, I said. There's a difference. He shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping. This is some kind of revenge, isn't it? You want to humiliate me. No, I said, and I meant it. I want you to see what I built. I want you to understand what you threw away when you kicked me out. He looked down, his hands gripping the edge of the table. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought you needed to learn to stand on your own. You wanted me to fail, I said quietly. You wanted proof that I wasn't good enough, and when I didn't give you that proof, you invented it. He flinched, but he didn't argue. For a long moment, we sat in silence, and I could see him struggling with something, pride, regret, maybe both. If I sell to you, he said finally, what happens to me? You get enough to pay off your debts and keep your house, I said. You can consult for a year if you want help with the transition. After that, you're done, you retire. And if I don't sell, then someone else buys you in foreclosure and you lose everything, your choice. He closed his eyes and I saw his shoulders sag. How long do I have to decide? 2 weeks, I said. I stood, dropping cash on the table for both our coffees. My lawyer will send over the terms, read them carefully. I started to walk away, but his voice stopped me. Ethan, I turned back and he was looking at me with something that might have been desperation. Can I ask you something? I waited. Why did you even take my call? He asked. If you hate me this much, why not just let me drown? I thought about that for a moment, about all the years I'd spent angry, building, proving, and then I realized the truth. I didn't hate him, I just didn't need him anymore. Because I wanted you to see this moment, I said. I wanted you to know that I didn't need your approval to succeed, I just needed you out of the way. I walked out of the coffee shop and didn't look back. The acquisition moved forward exactly as I'd planned. My father signed the papers 3 days before his credit line was called in. He kept his house, paid off his debts, and agreed to consult for 6 months. I restructured Callaway Manufacturing within the first 90 days, cut overhead, renegotiated supplier contracts, brought in new leadership. Within a year, it was profitable again. My father showed up for work during those 6 months, but we barely spoke. He'd sit in his old office, now a glorified storage room, and watch as I undid 15 years of his mistakes. I could see it eating at him, the fact that I'd succeeded where he'd failed, that I'd taken everything he'd built and made it better. On his last day, he came to my office. I was reviewing quarterly projections, and I didn't look up when he knocked. I'm done today, he said. I know, I said, still focused on my screen. I just wanted to say, he stopped, searching for words. I just wanted to say I was wrong about you, about everything. I finally looked at him. He looked older than he had 6 months ago, worn down by the weight of his own mistakes. I felt a flicker of something, not pity exactly, but recognition. He'd been trying to build something too, once. He just built it on the wrong foundation. I know, I said. He nodded, hesitated, and then turned to leave, but I stopped him. Dad, he looked back, surprise flickering across his face. I hadn't called him that in 15 years. You were right about one thing, I said. I did need to stand on my own. I just didn't need you to push me off a cliff to do it. He didn't say anything. He just nodded once and then he walked out. I didn't see him much after that. We'd cross paths occasionally at family events, my mother's birthday, Thanksgiving. He was quieter now, smaller in a way that had nothing to do with age. He'd ask about the business sometimes, careful questions that I'd answer politely, and I could see him trying to bridge the gap between us. But the gap was too wide, built from too many years of silence and resentment. I didn't forgive him, but I stopped needing him to see me, and in a strange way, that was enough. Years later, I got a call from my mother. My father had had a heart attack, not fatal, but serious enough to scare him. She asked if I'd come visit him in the hospital, and I said I would. When I walked into his room, he was sitting up in bed, looking fragile and pale. He smiled when he saw me, a real smile, and for the first time in my life, I saw something in his eyes that looked like pride without conditions. "Hey, son," he said. "Hey, Dad," I said. We talked for an hour about nothing important, the weather, the business, my mother's garden, and when I left, he grabbed my hand and held it for a moment. "I'm proud of you," he said. "I should have told you that a long time ago." "I know," I said. And this time I meant it. 3 years after my father's heart attack, I was sitting in a board meeting when Diane leaned over and whispered, "You need to see this." She slid her tablet across the table, showing me a news alert. Callaway Manufacturing had just been named Supplier of the Year by the National Manufacturing Association. It was a small industry award, but it meant something. It meant we'd turned the company into more than what it had been. We'd made it a model. After the meeting, I called my mother. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm and a little breathless. "Ethan, I just saw the news. Your father's been telling everyone in the neighborhood." I smiled despite myself. "Is he there?" "He's out in the garden, hold on." I heard rustling and then my father's voice came on the line. "Ethan, did you see?" "I saw," I said. "Congratulations." "Congratulations to you," he corrected. "You're the one who made this happen. I'm just the old man who gets to brag about it." It was a small moment, but it felt significant. For the first time, he wasn't taking credit or offering hollow praise. He was just acknowledging the truth. "You started it," I said. "I just kept it going." There was a pause, and then he said, "I know I can't undo the past, Ethan, but I'm grateful for the chance to see this, to see what you've built." "Me too," I said. We talked for a few more minutes, and when I hung up, I felt something I hadn't expected: closure. Not forgiveness exactly, but something close to peace. That peace grew over the next few years. My father and I found a rhythm, not close but not distant either. We'd meet for lunch once a month, and he'd ask about the business, about my life. I'd tell him about acquisitions, about challenges, and he'd listen with genuine interest. He never offered advice unless I asked, and when he did, it was thoughtful and measured. He was learning slowly how to be a father without conditions. I was 35 when Lou Brennan passed away. He'd been in declining health for a while, but it still hit me hard. Lou had been the one who believed in me when no one else did, the one who taught me that success didn't have to come at the cost of decency. At his funeral, I gave the eulogy and I talked about how he'd given me a chance when I had nothing. I saw my father in the crowd, sitting next to my mother, and he was crying. Afterward, he came up to me. "That was beautiful," he said. "Lou sounds like he was a good man." "He was," I said. "He was everything I needed when I needed it most." My father nodded, and I could see him processing that, understanding, maybe for the first time, how much he'd failed me and how much someone else had filled that gap. "I'm glad you had him," he said quietly. "Me too." A year later, I made a decision that surprised even me. I started a foundation in Lou's name. The Brennan Opportunity Fund offered grants and mentorship to young people who were trying to start businesses but didn't have access to capital or guidance. I wanted to give others the chance Lou had given me, the chance to prove themselves without starting from nothing. My father was one of the first donors. He wrote a check for $50,000 and handed it to me over lunch, his hand steady. "I know it doesn't fix anything," he said, "but I want to be part of this. I want to help you do something good." I took the check and I thanked him. And I realized in that moment that he'd finally learned the lesson I'd been trying to teach him for 20 years, that being a father wasn't about control or approval. It was about showing up. By the time I turned 40, Apex Solutions had grown into a portfolio of 23 companies, spanning manufacturing, logistics, and distribution. I'd built something that would outlast me, something that mattered. And when I looked back at the 18-year-old kid standing on his father's porch with 2 duffel bags, I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt gratitude, because that moment, that brutal, defining moment, had forced me to become the person I was always meant to be. One evening, I invited my parents over for dinner at my house. It was a small gathering, just the 3 of us, and I made pancakes. My mother laughed when I served them, and my father looked confused. "Pancakes for dinner?" he asked. "It's a long story," I said. "But they mean something to me." We ate together, talking about nothing and everything, and for the first time in my life, I felt like we were a family, not perfect, not healed, but present. After dinner, my father and I stood on the back porch looking out at the yard. He was quiet for a long time, and then he said, "I'm sorry, Ethan, for all of it, for not seeing you, for not believing in you, for making you prove yourself when I should have just loved you." I looked at him, this man who had once been so large and frightening in my life, and I saw him clearly now, flawed human trying. "I know," I said, "and I forgive you." He nodded, his eyes wet. "Thank you." We stood there for a while, side by side, not saying anything more, and in the silence I realized that this quiet, imperfect peace was the thing I'd been building toward all along. Not revenge, not vindication. Just the chance to stand next to my father and feel like I didn't have to prove anything anymore. A few months later, I got a call from a journalist writing a profile on self-made entrepreneurs. She wanted to interview me about how I'd built Apex Solutions. I agreed, and during the interview, she asked me the question I'd been expecting. What would you say to your 18-year-old self the day you were kicked out? I thought about it for a long time. And then I said I'd tell him that the worst thing that ever happened to him was going to become the best thing, because it was going to teach him that he didn't need anyone's permission to be extraordinary. He just needed to believe in himself. The profile ran a month later, and my father called me after he read it. "That was a good answer," he said. "Thanks," I said. "I'm proud of you, son." "I know, Dad," I said. "I know." And this time when I said it, I believed it too.